reflect on each other's opening statements?
Well, I have one thing I think that, well, people said a lot of very smart stuff, but one thing I think is a big issue is the peer reviewable aspect of the work which is done in think tanks. And even though I don't think we strive to put out publications which will appear in certain journals, it would be good just in terms of having an open debate that a wider maybe community would be able to assess the stuff we do. For example, we are publishing a new report on Wednesday this week, and about 50 people have read it in advance. And we've tried to have a very sort of wide scale from all the different political parties, but from all walks of the social sort of life. We have unemployed young people, we have students, and so on. But still, I feel it's not. I would never say that this is sort of a verifiable truth because 50 people are only 50 people. But it would be very good to have some kind of sort of more systematized approach to this.
Yes, I don't think anyone opposes the idea of having as wide audience as possible reading some publications in advance. Of course, it's always also a matter of time and resources you have at your disposal. Sometimes I do also feel that it would be a good idea to have kind of a very wide sort of also non-scientific board looking at some kind of publication. Now, often what's being done in the think tank I represent is to have some kind of scientific committee who are actually social scientists commenting on some work when it's in progress, not actually looking at finished manuscript, but trying to follow that when it's being written. Now, I do think that it contributes more to the actual scientific value of the publication. Of course, the downside is that it kind of engages those social scientists in the writing process so that it can make it more difficult for them to look at the text as outsiders. So there are, I guess, two sides of the coin here. To sort of pick up on something which I represented. First, the point of potential replicability is a good point. I hope I said it myself. If you look at different kinds of criteria of legitimate social science, now of course, one basic criteria is that theoretically it's always possible to replicate the research. Now, practically, I doubt it's not always possible. If you're looking at a sort of political phenomenon or social scientific phenomenon, it can be a passing phenomenon. It can be very time-bound in the sense that practically it's impossible to replicate it. But of course, when designing research methodology, that should also be something of a guiding criteria. Generally, I'm not sure I believe in the concept of facts in social science as much as you do, at least in the presentation. A lot of social scientists or philosophers of social science tend to be quite critical of the idea of social scientific fact for a good reason. The reason that social scientific research is always somehow value-laden and reflects the theoretical perspective. It's already grounded on some choices which might inevitably be normative in nature, like, say, economics. Now, economics tends to produce lots of facts, but even in economics, I think we should be asking which economics we're talking about. Right? If you think of, say, monetarist economics or Keynesian economics, they are very, very consistent on their own concepts. They just tend to start from different basic worldview or some methodological assumptions related to, for example, what is money? How does the existence of money relate to the existence of political community, and so on and so on. And you tend to have to make these choices before even starting to produce the facts. Right? So I do think that we have to uphold some scientific values or be honest on the starting points of what we do. But I would be a bit more doubtful of that category of facts. Facts, as they appear, might often only reflect hegemonic ideas or sort of logical, or be only reflections of what is logical given some hegemonic starting points, and not necessarily be reflections of external social reality as such. But I don't think I have more sort of immediacy in my mind.
Well, I mean, of course, you're right in the sense that, and this applies to all scientific research. As a researcher, you must make your sort of your own value grounds known to the reader, so the reader knows where you're coming from. Because, of course, you choose your own measures, or even often, for example, in social psychology, which is my field, I'm constantly in social psychology. You construct your measures. You choose which items you have, and these, of course, might reflect your value choices. So I do agree with you, but I think insofar as you make your position known, it's not wrong to talk about facts, especially when we talk about math. And of course, statistics can also be misconstrued, they can be misused, but that's not very scientific, is it? And this is where replicability comes in hand. I mean, for any think tank, be they independent or with a political agenda, say that you would withhold your data from somebody who says, I want to look at what you've done, can I please have your data? You say no. I mean, that's, I think, the first sort of rule breaker. You can never do that. And this is, of course, an intrinsic part of what we do as think tanks, both you and vigorous, that we want to have open debate, we want to have open discussion. Because in Finland, a big challenge is that the focus is not on what is being said, but on who is saying it. So people stop listening. For example, when I tell people that we have Björn Wahlroos on our board, that's when they stop listening to what I say and they just think, no, horrible, horrible, horrible. And I think this is a very big challenge in the political field here in such a small country.
There's actually a similar phenomenon in the scientific realm. There's this phenomenon of scientific authority. It depends on who says, who speaks, etc.
Or whether it's a professor or a doctor.
For example, or
and not just
prominent person from a prominent prestigious university, etc. Like that. There are a couple of issues here that have been taken up. One has to do with facts. I mean, the challenge that, as you formulated it for either of how do we get people to absorb facts despite emotions? I mean, this actually, I'm a friend of facts, but then we need to distinguish between facts out there that are there regardless of our beliefs and feelings and evaluations of them, etc. And then the facts as we construe them and things like that. And now this, and the latter is very, very, of course, contestable and disputable and uncertain and things like that. But this idea that it would be your mission to get people to absorb fact despite emotions reminds me of the sociology of science idea that people typically in different disciplines or exponents of different theories believe that they are in possession of the facts, and if somebody is in disagreement, they are biased, they are laden with their emotions or ideologies or irrationalities and things of that kind. There is this kind of asymmetry. And therefore, I'm a bit dubious about this idea that you would be, or anybody would be, irrefutably in possession of the facts and would only educate others to adopt these facts and thereby to sort of give way to their emotions.
Right, of course, and this is I think I read somewhere that Finns are the least media critical people in Europe. And if it's printed in Helsinki, I'm not sure if it's on the 10 o'clock news, then it's a fact. And I for one, I want my kids to be able to read the media and think, okay, this person has written so and so, but what are his own values and beliefs? And this is of course the way I want people to treat the information we put out. But we just ask what people do think and that they do listen. I'm not saying that we're right, but we're presenting an alternative solution. And I think that's what everybody's doing. I mean, we're not exactly drowned by information in this country. Or we are, but it's presented in a way which doesn't give, I think, much room for the individual to think.
Just to pick up on something which we previously said, I think this is actually a highly important element of the debate here, which just said that it shouldn't be important who's saying, but rather what is being said, right? Now, of course, this is the very, very basic, something belonging to the very basics of what sort of argumentation theory tells us, the very sort of elementary causes in good argumentation. Don't use ad hominem argumentation, right? Look at what's being said, not who says. But now, shouldn't we really, in a field like think tanks, be a bit more skeptical about the idea that this kind of ad hominem argumentation is necessarily necessarily a bad thing. What I'm referring to is that there are lots of personal vested interest also in different kinds of processes and behind lots of funding, right? There might be people having a reason to promote certain ideologies, not only because of their ideological nature, but it's because of their personal interest. Or companies say, if there's research done on, say, climate change, and you find that there's a large oil company funding it, shouldn't that be a part of the sort of fairness of argument to point out who's funding that there's that kind of vested interest involved? Part of the very sort of ideal of openness in science, to also point out that who is saying, or who's implicitly saying, or who's behind some research might have an effect of what's being produced.
Well, of course, but I mean, I don't think a proper think tank is a lobby organization. And of course, I agree with you. I don't think an oil company should fund a climate change study. It's quite unscientific, and if they do, I mean, it should be said so on the first in the first paragraph. But I think it's always important to distinguish between think tanks and lobby organizations. These are not the two, same things.
Anyway, as a brief follow-up, why exactly don't you accept public funding? What's the level of public funding?
Well, because we believe that, publicly funded think tanks are funded with tax money. And I, for example, have not chosen that my tax money will go to this and this and this think tank. So we prefer people to give us money out of free will.
But then you would refuse to pay any taxes whatsoever because you've never chosen the
But no, this is not about refusing to pay tax.
destination of that money.
For example, I pay tax because I think free healthcare and free education are important things in Finland. But I don't necessarily think that, for example, political parties need to have think tanks which are sponsored by tax money, such as some are.
Just a follow-up. Sure.
I was just thinking,
which you would assume that would, for example, happily support this, but because we also support gay marriage, the division of church and state, and so on, they don't think that we're doing the right thing. My point is just that I don't think it's very fruitful to make a distinction between leftists and rightists in this case. I mean, that's how the market works. If your idea works, you're able to sell it. And I think you'd be surprised if you know how little our budget we operate.
Okay, let's take comments, questions.
Thank you. I'm also a bit suspect of this idea of putting facts and emotions to opposite sides. Because it seems to imply that there is some source, somebody who's representing facts, and then there are those people who are irrational and emotional. This kind of equation of irrationality and emotion comes up as a kind of implication from what you say. And I mean, emotions seem to be at stake, but at a different level. They seem to be involved in this kind of value commitments that lie behind these different frames of enter where we come to engage with this social scientific research. As Teppo Eskinen pointed out, that there is this value-based entrance points that differ people, and therefore, for instance, leftist thinkers take equality as a perhaps more important value as freedom, or they have different interpretation of what freedom means to them. But this emotional commitment lies at the level of values rather than being something where you could evaluate this, emotions versus facts, which seems to come up from your perspective.
Yes, okay, I'm not sure I understand your question, or was it just a comment?
It's more like a comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you an example, which is not from the political world. I did my master's thesis here from the university on the attitudes of policemen, of the Finnish police force towards immigrants. And I sent the questionnaire out to the entire police force of Finland. Received a quite low answer rate, 14%, so it's not, I can't draw any general conclusions. But what was clear was that those policemen who said they had positive, for example, contact with immigrants and had more positive attitudes, the strongest mediator in between in a regression analysis was always whether they felt empathy or whether they felt positive feelings towards the immigrants. Whereas if they knew that immigrants were good people, for example, in the cognitive side, it didn't have any effect at all in this. So emotions, this is just an example. You see what I'm getting at? That if you're trying to, for example, reduce prejudice towards immigrants among a working group who always meets a lot of clients under not so optimal situations, for example, you meet people who hit their wives and hit their children, and you tend, of course, to meet a lot of immigrants too in that work. But if you always meet them under negatively loaded circumstances, if you don't have the emotional, sort of positive emotion in play, you can never have more positive attitudes towards them. And it's just, and this is something which has been found all over the world when you've done social psychological studies of how people react to not just immigrants, but any other minority group or groups which are not their own, is that the emotional component is very important. And this is, of course, not the same as political ideology, but it still says something about how we tend to process information.
Yeah, I agree with you that emotions do have that influence on how we process information and cognition in general. But still seems to be that this conflict between emotion is not at the level of first order facts, but it's more at the order of value commitments.
Okay, Carlo.
So the first speaker mentioned that mentioned the use of expert interviews as part of the methodology of think tanks, and I'm very interested in this because, well, one comment is that I don't think that that's not a scientific methodology, because engineers actually use that all the time, or reserved uses that all the time. But my question is, what kind of criteria, if any explicit criteria, are involved in selecting experts? And I'm interested because that goes back to the problem of values and objectivity and all those things. So you can very easily select the people that you know will likely give certain kind of answers rather than others, and so skewing, so to speak, your opinion in the available spectrum, so to speak. So I'm wondering what kind of criteria you would suggest for that.
Now, I'll be very honest with you. This is a country of 5 million people. You take any very specific question and you try to find 10 experts, you have them all, right? That happens most of the time, right? For example, in September we published a report on children's daycare and how the proposed cut of the subjective right to daycare would affect the government economically and what kind of social consequences that would have. And the authors of the report, they interviewed 10 experts. Now that's included pretty much everyone in the field of social science, scientific university who had actually seriously studied the subject. The main sort of responsible civil servants in the three largest towns in Finland, and some civil servants at the ministry responsible for children's daycare. And so practically, in a country of this size, it's very easy to select experts by taking them all. Right? So that's kind of selection criteria is very, very obvious.
The research done in places like business schools is very heavily dependent on consulting experts. It's very, very sort of legitimate, justified method. So it's not at all excluded in the scientific realm at all. By the way, I think there is a parallel here, or analogy perhaps, between this question and then the idea that I got from Christina. Emily, you said your mission is to disseminate fact-based information. There's no pretension to be scientific, so you only disseminate information that consists of facts or is fact-based. But then, of course, the further question is, how do you establish yourself that you have access to the reliable facts? There needs to be a lot of epistemic trust between you and your informant, maybe in the scientific sphere, etc. And then, I mean, of course, yes, but how do you, just like selecting the expert, the reliable experts, how do you select your scientific informants as reliable sources of credible facts?
Well, in the case of Europe, we have quite large experts and advisors network, which consists of professors from Finland, but also of researchers from abroad, and the different research staff of a number of international think tanks. And a lot of what we do is done on a voluntary basis. For example, the report we're publishing now on Wednesday has been co-written with Professor Pauli Franco for free because he thought it was a good idea. And of course, we try to approach very sort of a wide academic base. Like I said, I absolutely salute and welcome the idea of having a more peer-reviewable sort of platform for this. But for me, if a person is a professor here, I think it's I hold that in high esteem. But I also hold an independent researcher in high esteem if I can see what that person has done, and if those, for example, the articles he has published have been peer-reviewed and appeared in journals, because then you know that maybe 50 or 100 people have looked at the text and found it to be good enough to be published.
Insofar as the sort of political preferences of these prominent professors is concerned, I wonder if they are sort of statistically nicely distributed or whether there's any bias here.
Well, I haven't asked them all what they feel, but you may rest assured that, for example, Heikki Hilamo, who has contributed to the report which we are giving out on Wednesday, probably does not share my views on market economy, but he does think that the model represented is everyone. So we do have a wide spectrum. We also have Osmo Soininla, who of course is not an academic, but it represents an entirely other spectrum of thinking.
Okay, then we have,
I think there is an interesting clarification to be made from a distinction, and that actually comes from statistics. If you want to clarify the difference between think tanks and academia, and that is that of hypothesis and data. So where do hypotheses come from is one question, and I think that think tanks deal with this question in a very different way from academia, which is that you often take hypotheses as given, and you do not postulate explicitly where the hypothesis comes from. And when in academia you have to have a theoretical basis, etc., you often have these hidden premises that are necessary for your conclusions to follow that you don't actually explicitly postulate. But then when it comes to what kind of data is actually support for what kind of a hypothesis, and how much should we update our degree of belief to the hypothesis in accord with our data, that is the question of empirical adequacy, which is a cognitive or scientific value that is actually almost the only one that philosophers of science nowadays would agree with to be a demarcation criteria. And that is an interesting thing. I think Kristina made a mistake by using the term verifiability, which is an ancient thing, and which after that was replaced by falsificationism and then by testability, coming to a smaller and smaller thing.
It's been a while since I did my methodology course.
But anyhow, when in academia, where the hypotheses come from, the criteria are more stringent for academics than for think tankers. I would say that empirical adequacy, that is the role between the data and your hypothesis, has to be more stringent for think tankers than for academia. And why? It's because in order for any of your suggestions to work in real policy, you have to have causal models that actually very stringently link your hypothesis to the data that you've taken. When in academia we're always lucky just to postulate something and never actually having to fulfill these postulates in reality and see if it works in pragmatics. So what I'm saying is that in think tanks you have to have very, very stringent conditions of empirical adequacy, i.e. causal models for your work to make any sense, but where the hypothesis comes from, you do not have to be that explicit about, which you actually have to be within academia.
Well, you pretty much summed up why I chose the think tank world and not the academic world, because I'm actually interested in being acquainted with the real world.
I would be defending the sort of general publications we've been doing that hypotheses are not that sort of given. I mean, they can be also, they can come from different sources with different motivations. They can be past sort of usual social scientific tests and so on and so on. What I'd like to remind you about is that practically working for a think tank, the sort of scientific demarcation problem is not that often about scientific methodology itself, but rather a matter of publication criteria. What think tanks really do, what I do day to day is that I don't really do social I've sort of looked through what kind of research to initiate and when I can be sort of confident that some manuscripts or an article is fit to be published, and so I can personally stand behind the publication, right? So, and of course, it's relevant to talk about scientific methodology here, but I would urge you, if you really want to think about reality for working in a think tank and reality of how does the think tank establish its credibility, to think more of to think yourself more as a journal editor than a social scientist committing research.
I think to me that sounds a bit too cynical, because if you want to make an impact that is data-based, you should have models that you rely on, and i.e. they should be basically as good as causal models come. And if you don't have this, then actually you shouldn't be, or if you're not trying to even get there, then you shouldn't be advising policy at all. You're just doing politics by disseminating information to the people, but the information might not be worth anything.
Sure, of course. I'm just trying to point out that what kind of problems of reliability emerge in sort of day-to-day work you do within the think tank. Just as a reminder.
Is the follow-up on this?
Say that again.
You were talking in the previous slide about Marxism and Leninism and liberalism and stuff like that. And I understand that we can never, separate ourselves from these values what we have about politics or general about life. And when this slide came, you started talking about the epistemic norms of science, like pre-reviewing and stuff like that. And I think these norms are quite separated, or quite different from each other, or have I misunderstood? Are you talking about completely different?
I'm not sure I was talking about personal values of social scientists. If I get the impression, I'm sorry, I was talking about how social scientific paradigms always carry some value judgment within their methodology and their general workflow and so on. But sort of the ethics or values of individual researcher, I don't think I was talking about that.
I was exactly asking this because I wasn't sure about what came here. But does it mean then, for instance, that Keynesian and a liberal economist have completely different or fundamentally different, values about how research should be done, basically? Because that was one of your examples. You were talking about Keynesian economics. I'm sorry, Martin, you don't have.
No, I'm not saying that they have different ideas on how research should be done, different ideas of scientific values. I said they have some very fundamental differences of ideas of what economics essentially is about.
Yes.
Is economics essentially a science on how goods and services are traded, or is the science about monetary systems, say, or what a Marxist economist would say, it's science about production and the conditions of production. Okay. So I'm saying you can take different viewpoints on similar phenomenon, which tend to be somehow seen as political as such. It's very obvious that Marxism and liberalism take different political standpoints.
I agree with that. Thank you.
And we have at least four people wishing to speak, and therefore I would like to ask you to be brief. Martina is next.
Okay. I found very interesting the fact that the two of you are here. We heard like two different models of work and how think tanks are situated between the worlds of science and politics. I'm very interested in how the two of you did that. So to overemphasize maybe a little bit, we had one case where a think tank is basically has as a function the diffusion of scientific knowledge, and then sort of spreads it also to the world of politics, but did not seem to be very closely associated with politics itself. And we had another model, your model, which was much more of saying, well, you know, any kind of science is always also political, at least social sciences. And in that sense, what we're doing at the think tank is as much scientific as it is also political. And I think these are really quite separate kind of positionings. And I would wonder now in what respect you think this also shows in your activities itself. For example, how does it show in your case, in your publications or in your communication with different realms, the sense that what you're doing is always also political? In what sense, in your case, do you think you present your work as one which is sort of valid even outside any kind of political situation?
Saying that social science is in some sense also political. I mean, in the sense that it's always value-laden somehow. I think it's only being honest about what social science is about. It cannot be sort of a value-neutral enterprise, even though a lot of people would like to see it that way. I mean, that's only about honesty. What I was saying about think tanks and science was not that think tanks are as scientific as social science. I said that they're potentially as scientific. They can be that. There's no clear or given or evidence institutional demarcation criteria between social science and think tanks. And to me, that's reflected only in the urge to sort of represent or sort of convince the audience of our scientific quality. It's a matter of having to convince such an audience and potential audience of us following those scientific values, because it's that can be achieved, but it's not necessarily the case, and no one should take it as given that a think tank follows such sort of scientific values, right?
Yeah, if I just answer briefly, I will stress that we are by no means not political, but we are not party political, and I think this is sort of the big distinction. I can't as an individual say that I'm not political because I believe certain things and I vote and so on, but as an organization, we don't have a party boss. We're not required to further the agenda of a certain political party or even a certain institution. I know a lot of you probably think that our financiers decide what we write, but it really is the other way around, working on the principle of the free market. We have ideas, we productify them, we sell them to different potential financiers, and if people think we're doing a good work, they will finance us. And not the other way around. We're not saying give us money and we'll do what you want.
Okay, we have Samuli, Katarina, and Jan. So when you speak, think of the other two.
Yeah. So my question is that what you said about Hamilton argument. So say that now you have the new research coming up on the timelines. How do you see the dynamic between like the two of you? Why should Christina? What should she respond? Can she just say, according to what you said before, just that's something coming from the left, and just disagree the content of your research. If it's okay, if it's always about values in the way and perspective. So how do you see the dynamic of argument between, say, the two of you? If everything's that standpoint.
I'm not sure if I understand.
So this was a question to Stefan. So
Okay,
like you said that ad hominem arguments are not always that bad. Because it depends on who's saying it. So I'm just, if that's your view of argumentation, how do you see your own results as being important? Because I can see that then, if it's so that everything that we sort of, you can always raise an ad hominem argument, why couldn't Christina just say that, that's an opinion coming from a leftist think tank, I'm going to ignore it. I don't share the worldview, and values, I don't care. How would you respond?
them at the same time. If
Yeah,
something more intelligent.
I don't really know security organizations as well. Sometimes, of course, they have huge funding. They sometimes produce quite interesting publications. Sometimes they appear as not being at all involved with politics. Sometimes they, quite in contrary, do very political campaigning, and it's very hard to sort of even understand how are priorities and functions within that organization decided on. I don't really know.
I think it again raises the question of openness. I mean, you should always tell people what you're about, and I can say I don't know what the agenda of Citra is really. What you ask, I know what about it, but I don't.
Okay, I think what we have learned today is that think tanks are very important, interesting, exciting, but very hard to access and understand, partly due to their heterogeneity regarding their ways of functioning, the underlying principles, and all that. We have two nice examples here. But probably something important and interesting enough for also science students and philosophers of science to address in the future. So this was part of the reason for inviting them here. An early observation I made when these two people were given this before, the friend of freedom was very keen to observe the regulations regarding time, while the friend of regulation acted somewhat differently.
That's just my independent personality.
Okay. So thank you very much.